If you're looking for different ways to save for your kids' education, you've probably heard of 529 plans. Now, maybe you haven't quite pulled the trigger yet because you haven't had time to really look into how they work, what are the pros and cons, and like all investment accounts, they come with their own set of criteria that you need to really understand so that you can make the choice that is best for your family's financial situation. My name is Lauren. I'm a student loan consultant at Student Loan Planner, and we are going to start by talking about what exactly a 529 plan is. So it is a tax advantage savings plan designed to help pay for education. So as I said, we're going to go through some of the pros and cons, and I think we should start with the advantages because we always want to start on a happy note, right? Who wants to hear about the disadvantages right now? So number one, they provide tax-free growth and withdrawals. So tax-free always sounds good. That gets everyone excited, but what does that actually mean? Let me break down a quick example. If you put $10K in a 529 plan and it grows to $20K over time because you had it well invested, obviously I'm making these numbers up, you don't have to pay taxes on that additional $10,000 that you earned by having the money invested. Now, the money you initially invested was after tax dollars already, so you don't need to pay any additional money on that. Now let's look at the example of a non-529 plan. You invest $10,000 in a taxable account or a brokerage account, and you earn that same $10,000, you would have to pay taxes on that amount. That's how it works. But the 529 plan is different because as long as that extra $10K is used for educational expenses, you can withdraw it on a tax-free basis. All right, advantage number two is that there could be a state tax deduction or credit. So another really cool thing about a 529 plan is there can be this deduction or credit depending on what state you live in. So does matter where you live. Now, it's important to find out the details about what your specific state offers, if anything at all, because not all of them do. As an example, if you're one of the 9 states with no state income tax, then there's not going to be a tax advantage for you. Well, there's the after-tax growth, but there's not a state tax advantage. So let me be clear about that. There could be 2 tax advantages you get. Now, there's also the situation where you live in a state where there is some state income tax, but they just don't provide any credits for you participating in a 529 plan. In that case, you're going to want to look around at the investment options for the various plans to find something that best suits your needs instead of just going with the state 529 plan. Advantage number 3, there are low minimums to open the account. So many different things have barriers to entry, but 529 plans are easy to get started because you generally are not going to see minimums as it pertains to participating in a 529 plan. And the whole point is to put money away so that it can grow. So even by adding a little bit at a time, you don't have to be rich. This means you can put some away for your child, and having something is definitely better than having nothing. You can make additional decisions later on down the road if you didn't save enough, but getting it open, getting started is pretty easy, so don't let that be something that holds you back from not participating in a 529 plan. Advantage number 4 is there are no income restrictions. So when it comes to 529 plans, it does not matter if you're a high earner or a low earner. You will not be phased out based on your income. You can participate as long as you have someone you want to help save for their educational purposes. Also, it's never too late to sign up. If your financial situation has recently changed, allowing you to start putting aside for your kids' schooling, you can get started. So no income restrictions and no age restrictions. Even if you already have a high schooler or you personally want to go back to school yourself, you can still put some money away into a 529 plan. Of course, you have to decide if that's going to make a lot of sense for you, but it is at least an option. Number 5 is high contribution limits. So one of the cool things about 529 plans is that overall they have high maximum contribution limits. So while it varies plan by plan, the average seems to be around $300K. But I've also seen some plans that have accepted as much as $500,000. Now, even though our education system needs a complete overhaul, hopefully you will not need to save that much to fund your kids' education. I should also say that annually there are no contribution limits. However, you want to be mindful of the annual gift tax rules when making contribution decisions. These high contribution limits allow people like grandparents and friends and family to be able to also participate in college savings. So that creates a lot of flexibility around these contributions. Okay, let's move on to advantage number 6. You can change the beneficiary of the plan. So another awesome thing about 529 plans is that maybe you have multiple kids and you want to keep your life simple. You just send first kid off to college, they're done. They don't need any more educational expenses. You change the beneficiary and you send the second kid off to college using the same 529 plan. You can even use it for a niece or a nephew. Or maybe you decide to go back to school. You can use it for your own educational expenses as well. So changing the beneficiaries can be a nice little strategy to use. So the seventh advantage is that they have a minimal effect on a student's financial aid. So when school starts to get closer, there's going to be grants and scholarships and all sorts of things to think about. But you're also going to need to fill out your financial aid to see what you're eligible for. Because 529 plans are owned by the parent, they have a very minimal effect on financial aid for the student. I see parents wanting to save for their kids' college, but they don't because they're afraid of messing up the opportunity for their kid to get financial aid. I see it all the time where there's a real need, but someone earns just a little bit over the limit they need to receive financial aid, and it's not going to be the 529 plan that throws all that off. A 529 plan is actually a good way to protect eligibility for financial aid, and it could be something that helps bridge the gap so your child is not having to take on additional student loan debt, or maybe even you taking on that debt. So as you can see, there are a lot of wonderful things about 529 plans, but there are some considerations to think about before getting started. So we have to talk about the cons. On the negative list, number one, we have the funds are limited to qualified education expenses. So I've already mentioned that above, but the growth that your money have is only tax-free if it's withdrawn to spend on educational expenses. So what are educational expenses, you ask? Because there's a lot of things related to getting your education, right? Well, that's tuition and fees. Then you should also think about books and supplies. There's computer, there is internet access, room and board is another option. Maybe you have some sort of special needs equipment for your education or related to your college experience. So there's a lot of different options there. However, if you use the funds on something that does not qualify, there are taxes and penalties. So as an example, your child maybe decides they don't want to go to college and you don't have anywhere else to, or anyone else to send for their education, and you still want to get those funds and get access to them, that's where you're going to be looking at taxes and penalties. But if you do decide not to use those funds for educational expenses, just be mindful that you will pay taxes on the portion that was earned and also a 10% penalty. So before you go this route, make sure you've thought about all the different options that exist. The other disadvantage is that not all states offer the tax benefit. So if there is no state income tax deduction or credit, you're not going to be excited about it because we all want to save as much as we possibly can. So this doesn't mean that you shouldn't contribute to a 529 plan. It just means that you don't have the extra tax savings. You don't have that tax savings as an extra benefit. Another con is that fees vary from plan to plan. This can be a little bit confusing, a lot to take into consideration. And sometimes when it comes to investing, people just jump in so their money will start working on their behalf and they don't have time to really understand the fees associated with the different investment vehicles that they've chosen. Vanguard has a cool tool to help you compare the various plans that exist so you can see the fees, you can see whether or not they have the state deduction or not. So check that out. Unfortunately, I've got another con for you, and it's that you have limited options if your child does not go to college. So a 529 plan, like I said, is meant for education planning. If they do something different altogether, we have to think about what to do with these funds. One thing you can do is start to redirect those dollars toward K through 12 expenses. So if we're approaching, junior or senior year, and there's educational expenses, maybe rerouting those dollars in that direction to start spending it down, because it's not just for college 529 plans at this point. Or like we talked about many times, changing the beneficiary over to someone else who could benefit from the 529 plan. The next thing that's not so great about 529 plans is that contributions may be subject to federal gift tax. So as of 2021, the annual gift tax exclusion is $15,000 per donor per recipient. So you can contribute $15,000 to a 529 plan without triggering any gift tax. You can also elect to spread your contribution over a 5-year period and contribute up to $75,000 while staying below the gift tax exclusion. So if you've got a lot of money that you're trying to figure out what to do with, a 529 plan could be a cool way to disperse those funds. Okay, we've covered some pros and we've covered some cons. Let's talk about some alternatives if by chance I've turned you off from the 529 plan. So the first one is the UGMA and the UTMA. You might hear those terms all the time. It's Uniform Gift to Minors Act, Uniform Transfers to Minors Act. These are custodial accounts which allow for the money to be spent on anything as long as it benefits the minor who is the recipient of the account. So now we're not limited to just education expenses. The problem is these investment accounts are taxable and they are considered the asset of the student for FAFSA purposes. So this is going to have a bigger negative impact than the 529 plan would. This means it can reduce the financial eligibility of your child. So you definitely want to think about that before deciding to participate in that plan. The flexibility may make it worth it for you, but you have to decide what's right for you and your family. A second option is the Coverdell Education Savings Account, or the Coverdell ESA is the short name. So these are similar to 529 plans because they allow tax-free withdrawals. However, you can only invest $2,000 per year, so very low limits here. Ultimately, each type of investment has its advantages, but the 529 plan is going to offer great tax benefits. It will have a minimum impact on your child's financial aid eligibility in the future. So if you're looking for a low-maintenance investment option to save for your children's education, 529 plans, in my opinion, are worth exploring. Now that you know about 529 plans, go watch our next video, the 11 top financial aid strategies to get more money for college. That is definitely what we all want to do.